Hello, and welcome to the Gravel Ride Podcast. I'm your host, Craig Dalton. This week on the podcast, I'm going to ask for a little personal indulgence. My father, Colin Dalton, is in town. He's been such an important influence on my personal cycling journey that I wanted to get him on the podcast and talk about his own journey in cycling. As you'll learn, Colin was born in the United Kingdom and found his world changed after getting on the bicycle for the first time. The bicycle opened up avenues for exploration around the United Kingdom, later turned to a passion for racing and touring all over Europe. Cycling continues to be a passion of the Dalton family and is one of those things that unites many of us around the world. With that, let's dive right into my conversation with Colin Dalton. Colin Dalton, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's fun to be here with you, Craig, in Mill Valley.
So for the listener, Colin Dalton obviously shares the same last name as me. Thanks to vaccination, I'm finally seeing my father after about a year and a half, so it's great to see you.
Yeah, it was good getting together. Last April was the last time we got together as a family.
Yeah. So I thought it would be interesting. Obviously, this is a gravel cycling podcast, but I probably wouldn't have cycling in my life if it wasn't for you. So could you just tell the listener about where you grew up, and then we'll get into your cycling background?
Yeah, I was growing up in an industrial town in the north of England, Kingston upon Hull, and the only form of transport we had was bicycles. So essentially I grew up on a bike. And having a great sense of adventure, I used it as a tool for exploring. And I've continued to explore the world on a bike for the rest of my life.
So you also have 4 brothers, and were all the brothers into cycling?
I think at some point everybody took it up, but there's only 2 of us got into the racing bikes.
Okay, so obviously, we've all had bikes as kids, and we all use them to kind of explore. Yeah. But I suspect, given the time frame, and maybe just to give the listener some perspective, you were born in what year?
I was born in 1936.
Okay, so in the late 1940s, when you hit your teenage years in Hull, were you then going on longer rides to explore the different communities around you?
Yeah, I had the first real bike when I was about 11 years old, and I just started exploring the neighborhood, just going in ever-increasing wider circles around my hometown.
So when you talk about your first real bike, what did that translate to?
We now call it, in America, you'd call it a truck bike.
Yeah, and what does that mean?
Oh, it's just a steel bike with steel components, a heavy bike with no gearing whatsoever. Just one gear.
And did it have drop handlebars?
No, they just had straight handlebars.
Okay, yeah. So that's a single speed bike, as we'd call it in this vernacular. Yeah. Did you say it had cantilever brakes, or did it have a coaster brake?
It just said coaster brakes. Yeah.
Okay, and so how far out of town were you able to explore with that type of setup?
I did 100-mile rides on a truck bike. I remember going with my elder brother, who had what we called a racing bike, and I remember going to Scarborough and back in one day, which is a 100-mile ride.
Okay. And did you enjoy it enough that you sought out the resources to get a drop bar bike? Is that kind of what happened?
It was a complete passion. I leveraged 2 Christmases and 3 birthdays with my parents to get me what I called a racing bike. And I don't think they held themselves to that, but so I was sufficiently enthusiastic about getting a bike, which made some sense to me.
And you mentioned you had another brother who was interested in racing. Who was that?
Well, Carl, my elder brother Carl, who was 18 months older than me, he did get into racing.
And did he have a drop bar bike prior to you?
Yes. So I knew what I would like to get because he already had it.
And how did your vision of what racing meant form? Were you able to catch coverage in the newspaper of the Tour de France or earlier races in England?
Yeah, it's surprising. the guys I associated with imported French newspapers, the Equipe, and we were aware of the Tour de France before we ever even had any dream of going to France.
And was there a cycling club culture in Hull that was able to kind of embrace you under their wing as a young man?
Yeah, you started out by going to the cycling touring club, but you were aware there were 4 or 5 other clubs in the town, so there was lots of options to when you grew out of touring and started thinking about long distance touring or bicycle racing. There was lots of options.
So beyond the touring clubs, were there also racing clubs?
Yes.
And were there multiple racing clubs in the same town?
Yes. All of the clubs had a racing component, but they also had a touring component as well.
Were there rivalries between the clubs?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there was quite a lot of rivalry.
And I believe I've seen a picture of your racing license. Which club were you affiliated with?
Yeah. I was originated with Alpha Road Club, and we rode for the British League of Racing Cyclists, which was one of the alternative approaches to racing. The other one was mainly involved in time trials, and we were more interested in what we called mass start racing. So that was the incentive. We formed our own club, Alpha Road Club, because there wasn't one in Hull. So we became BLRC, British League of Racing Cyclists, and we were the only club there, but we could race all over Yorkshire as a team.
And what age did the team comprise of?
I was 16 at the time when I first started racing, and I think the eldest guy in the club would be about 22.
Okay. We talked a little bit offline about the type of bicycles and wheels that you were riding.
Yeah.
Did you say, so it was at this point you're on a geared bike.
Oh, yeah.
What size was the wheels?
No, we had 27-inch wheels by then,
Okay.
and tubular tires.
Okay.
That was the biggest issue. It's the most expensive item I had to deal with, and it was always a real difficulty when we've had flats. I could not automatically afford to get a new tire.
Right. We were talking about training a little bit, and you mentioned that you did ride on dirt roads.
Yeah, in my early days, in the touring days, and during the winter, we just used to explore all over the place, riding farm tracks. There weren't many gravel roads, but there were lots of farm trails, and we used to ride those.
Yeah, I think that's actually quite similar to what other parts of the country, maybe not Marin County where I live, but other parts of the country, a lot of the gravel cycling sport is really just on farm roads that cars would go on, but lesser trafficked roads.
Yeah, we also rode hiking trails as well.
Well, that sounds like fun.
Yeah.
A bit of an adventure.
Yeah.
So you eventually, you raced with that club for how many years?
Oh.
Do you remember?
I raced until I was about 21.
Okay.
And then I did take up racing later on.
Because at what age were you when you and Mom came to the United States?
Yeah, I was 26 years old then. And then I immediately bought a bicycle.
And you did a little racing. I know I've seen pictures of races of you in New York, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I rode for Century Road Club in New Jersey. It was no particular town designation, but it's a number of the communities in the northern part of New Jersey, and we used to get together. I used to ride recreational with them, and then also race at the weekends if there's a race. There weren't many races in those days. It was very rare to find a race to race. But there were some regular races in Central Park, and I rode a number of 50-mile races in Central Park, and also I remember one 100-mile race in Central Park, which meant doing about 16 laps of the park.
And would that be in the 70s?
Yes.
Okay.
And let's see, in the early 70s. I was in my early 30s by then.
And then somewhere along the way, you decided to at least put the bike on the back seat for a little while and become an endurance runner, correct?
Yeah, when I got involved in business, didn't have as much time to train for bike riding. I switched to running and became a marathon runner.
Okay. And at some point, switching over to my relationship with the bike, I guess I got introduced to the bike like most children fairly early on. Yeah. And in my younger years, I did a little bit of BMX racing. And I've mentioned on the podcast before that I didn't think you thought too favorably of BMX because it was a bit of a strange sport to you.
I thought it was strange that you'd want to get all this equipment and only ride one lap of a short course. And that was it.
So I did a little bit of that. And then in high school, you made the decision to offer myself and two friends a guided bike tour of upstate New York and Vermont. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. You were about 15 years old at the time.
Yeah, so freshman or sophomore in high school. And I remember that first day I had Lycra shorts, but I was too embarrassed to wear them. And I put cut-off sweatpants over top of them. And within the first 10 miles, I realized that I need to get over any bashfulness about wearing Lycra. And I took those shorts off, and I was much happier for it.
Oh, yes, it's the way to go.
The other funny thing I remember about that bike tour is that myself and the two other high school kids, we had big rear panniers on our bikes, and we were packing, everything we could cram in there. And you insisted on buying small front panniers that you run on the back of the bike and heavily editing the amount of gear you brought.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
I do, yes.
You definitely were proven to be right in that strategy. And it's funny in sort of modern conversation in this podcast, we talk to a lot of bike packers, and I've had my own experience bike packing at this point. And the new generation of bags and gears, they're very capable of carrying everything you need without racks anymore, but it is important to edit. So every time I've been out on a bike packing trip, I sort of remember back to those days of the sheer penalty you have for bringing excess gear.
Yeah. I can speak to that. When I was doing my university training with two other guys, we spent a month riding through France and Italy, taking just a small saddlebag behind the saddle. Yeah. So that was just one change of clothing. That's
and that's about the way to do it. I think it's you're not going to be the nicest smelling lad on the block, but it does the job, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I remember you telling me is you used to cram as much food as you could in a little tin and eat it on the rides.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have a lot of extra money to stop and resupply.
Oh, this is in my earlier days, yes. My mother used to pack a whole bunch of sandwiches, usually date sandwiches. And I could go away for the whole weekend with that one pack of sandwiches.
Tell me about some of the big rides you did for over the weekends back in those days.
Oh, well, we could ride from Hull to Skipton. When we were getting ready for the racing season, we'd go out and do a 160-mile Sunday ride. Believe it or not.
You tell me those stories, and it's sort of, I mean, I get it conceptually, and it's funny to me that the sport has actually evolved, the gravel cycling sport specifically has evolved to having a lot of these really long events, like what the so-called Super Bowl of gravel, which is coming up in a few weeks, called Unbound, is a 200-mile race.
Yeah.
And it seems huge, but you've told me multiple times that you've done these 160-mile rides.
The longest ride I did, I was invited to stay with some friends in London and rode down there in one day with a friend. That was a 200-mile ride.
So that's pretty much the length of the United Kingdom, is that right?
Well, from Hull to London, it's about a third of it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And north of Hull, could you ride into the Yorkshire Dales from Hull itself?
Yeah, the destinations for us were to go into West Yorkshire or which is the Yorkshire Dales, or alternatively to go to the North Yorkshire Moors, which is also a national park.
Which is where the Road World Championship rode through, right?
Yes, it covered both of those areas just 3 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I recognised all the roads they went on.
Yeah, I figured you would. So when you were in your 20s, you also did some traveling and cycling abroad. Can you tell us about some of those trips?
Oh, yes, with a couple of college friends who were really interested. We formed a racing team for Hull University, but during the summer we took off and did a month's tour of the mountain ranges in France and Italy.
And so was that in roughly the 1960s?
Oh, no, this was in...
50s?
Yeah, excuse me, this was about 1960... 61, 62.
Okay. So would you just ferry across to France and start pedaling?
No, we cheated a little bit because we got a train to Paris and then one down to Bayonne, which is on the border of France and Spain. And from there we took off and rode through the Pyrenees, going to all of the passes we'd read about in the Tour de France.
And did you have any sort of guidebook or any maps to go off of?
Oh, we just had a general map to look. We knew the mountain passes, and we just had some sort of preconception of where we're going, but no designated stopping points. We stopped in some youth hostels, some B&Bs, whatever. Okay, on one occasion we just slept out in the row.
And were you using your racing bike for that trip?
Yes.
So what did that look like at that age? I'm presuming it's down tube shifters and maybe a 5-speed cassette in the back?
No, we did have 10 speeds. So we had a dual front and 5 at the back, and levers on the down tube. Yeah.
You have some modern day road bikes. When you think about the low gearing you have on your Trek road bike today, how does it compare to the low gear of that bike?
I actually have the same gearing. I specifically got the gearing on my current bike to have some pretty low gears. As I got older, I needed the lower gears.
So you did have low enough gears to get over the Tourmalet and some of those big climbs?
Yeah, we've been using, I think, 46 by 25 or something like that.
Okay. Still a fairly hefty gear to get if you have bags on you and whatnot.
Well, we were traveling pretty light. The climbing wasn't that difficult.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And did you make it south of France in that trip?
We rode across the Pyrenees and then across the Riviera. I took a day off to enjoy the beach and then headed into Italy, just a short excursion into Italy, and then we rode up through the Alps.
Amazing. Yeah. It's amazing to me. I mean, cycling's been part of your entire life, effectively.
Oh, it still is.
Yeah.
I wouldn't miss a Sunday without going for a bike ride.
I know. Do you want to tell them where you normally do your riding?
Yeah. Well, we live in Tucson, Arizona, and it's a bicycle mecca because the weather is so good in the winter. All of the major racing teams come down to train down there in the winter. In fact, one year Lance Armstrong was in town. But so we have just a great city to ride in. Our backyard goes up to 9,000 feet.
Up on Mount Lemmon?
Yes.
Yeah. Listeners of the podcast may remember our episode with the Mount Lemmon gravel grinder, which actually goes up the backside of Mount Lemmon on the dirt.
Yeah, I drove that in my Jeep, but I haven't ridden it on the bike.
Yeah, one of these days I'm super excited to get down there.
Yeah, you might enjoy that, Craig. I think you would.
Yeah, and there's also a number of, as you may know on the podcast, there's a number of tour operators and camps that are operating out of Tucson and also a little further south in Patagonia, because as you can attest to from your really strong hiking career in that region, there's dirt roads and mountain passes all over the place in Tucson.
There's plenty of opportunities of the old Jeep roads. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a place that I definitely want to ride more off road for sure, because it's got that reputation.
I could I could tell you about some interesting places to visit.
I'm sure you can. Well, Dad, I appreciate your visit. I appreciate the time on the podcast. I thought it would just be fun to give the listener a little bit of glimpse into your life and how it affected my passion for cycling across the lifetime. So thank you for introducing me to cycling, and thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today.
Yeah, well, it's been delightful to visit you and celebrate the kids' birthdays. But I have to tell everybody that I'm still riding when I'm 84 years old.
So keep that in mind, everybody. Keep the pedals rolling. Big thanks to my dad for sitting down with me this week, and thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I realize it was a bit of a personal indulgence, but my passion for cycling simply wouldn't be here without my father and his enthusiasm for the sport over the years. Not a Sunday goes by without my dad hitting the bike paths of Tucson, Arizona. His lifetime commitment to the sport always keeps me stoked and reminds me if we stay fit and healthy and focused, we can have long cycling lives in front of us. That's going to do it for us this week. If you're looking to connect, please head over to theridership.com and join our online cycling community. It's totally free. You just need to get an invite via that link at www.theridership.com. If you're interested in supporting the podcast, ratings and reviews are always extremely appreciated, as well as visiting buymeacoffee.com/thegravelride. Until next time, here's to finding some dirt under your wheels.